Konnichiwa. Today we're going to talk about absorption, about absorbing Japanese. This is different from learning Japanese. It's also different from what's called acquiring Japanese, although there's quite a bit of overlap between them. And it's very important and something that's not often talked about. And one of the things that makes it important is that recently we've discussed various activities that don't, in the ordinary sense, involve learning more Japanese. And these activities may feel peripheral, but in fact they're vital. And that's because of the phenomenon of absorption. So in order to understand this phenomenon, we have to look a little bit at how the human memory works. And it works in ways that might in some cases be counterintuitive, at least to the usual way of looking at learning. We tend to think of the main problem of learning, of committing things to memory, as a problem of retention, retaining memories of what we want to learn. But actually, retention is really not a problem at all. The human mind has massive storage capacity. Some neuroscientists believe that the human brain never actually deletes any piece of information that it's seen or heard. It's all there somewhere, although most of it would be very difficult to retrieve. And that's the problem. Retrieval, not storage. And we can all see how much we actually retain. Everyone has at some time, I'm sure, watched a film or an episode of something that they've seen before. Maybe they don't even remember whether they saw it before or not, and they certainly can't remember anything about it. But once they start to see it, they say, yes, I remember that bit. That person says that next, and that kind of thing. And that's because, although we couldn't voluntarily retrieve the information was there, and with a little help, some of it was being retrieved. So I look at the question of learning, even very straightforward, clearly defined learning, like learning vocabulary, but as we're going to see, absorption involves a lot of much subtler things than that, which are crucial. But even in the most clearly defined learning areas, like learning vocabulary, the problem can be likened to the problem of paths in a jungle. When there aren't any paths, if we want to get from A to B, we have to beat our way and trample our way through the grey, green, greasy undergrowth until we get to where we're going. The first time we do this, it's very difficult. The second time, it's a little bit easier because we've beaten down the path a bit, but it's still very overgrown and difficult. The more times we do it, the easier that path becomes. And that is the fundamental secret of creating retrievability. Now, some people will say that there are other things involved, and there certainly are, such as the emotional impact, mnemonics and things which help us to remember, and all those things are important. But if we want to remember things instantly, the most important thing is beating down those paths, making retrieval really easy, instant. And that is terribly important, because if it takes you half a second to remember a word, and somebody's speaking at speed, and there are dozens of words in there, if only, say, 20% of them have a half-second delay on retrieval, you're not going to be able to absorb the sentence. You're not going to be able to retrieve the words quickly enough to understand the sentence. And even in reading, this delay disrupts our understanding. Instead of concentrating on what the sentence is saying, half our concentration or more is going on to what the actual words mean. And that makes comprehension of anything far more difficult and sometimes impossible. Now, the good news about this is that the more immersion we do, and in particular, the sort of thing I was talking about last week, like Tadoku, which is wide reading, rapid reading, where you don't have a dictionary, you just get the gist of what you're reading, you understand as much as possible, but you don't have a dictionary, you don't stop for anything. This kind of exposure, which isn't learning, you're not going to learn many new words this way, you might pick up one or two, but on the whole you're not going to learn anything. Things like talking to yourself in Japanese, where you're not going to learn anything because you don't know anything you don't know. But the point is that all of this kind of thing, watching anime without any subtitles, so you may pick up the odd word, but on the whole, what you're doing is beating down the paths. Of course, with watching anime, it's got to be comprehensible. There's very little value in watching things you don't understand. Now, what we find, let's just take the example of Tadoku, fast reading, is that we start knowing things from context in our reading. And this could be words and easily quantifiable things, but often it's far more subtle things that we couldn't put into Anki. For example, we'll often start finding that when, say, a half or two-thirds of a sentence is on one page and we have to turn the page, we know before we turn the page what the end of the sentence is going to be. And that's because we know how that kind of sentence usually ends, but also subtler things like how a person who talks in the way that this particular character talks is likely to end the sentence. This is how we listen to and read our native language. Especially in listening, we don't do what we think we do, which is hear each word and parse it into sentences. That's not what we do. We grab chunks that we know go together, words that we've heard together time and time and time again, so we're very familiar with them. And this means that even if we don't hear all the words, if some of them aren't clearly spoken, we still know what's happening because we've grabbed the chunk. And we can fill in the blanks because we know how these sentences generally fit together. We know what words usually belong together in these cases and in what order. And this is information that we don't really know we know, and that we couldn't very easily learn in a conscious manner. We learn it by beating down the paths, by simply getting used to how everything fits together. And the good news here is that although this does take a long time, a lot of input, it doesn't have to be careful learning input. It can be fun things. Watching anime that you broadly understand, you know enough of the language that you're not wasting your time, you are getting it. Tadoku, fast reading, where you may not get every word, but you're getting the general sense of everything. All of this is beating down those paths, and that is the key to absorbing Japanese. It doesn't mean that you never do careful reading where you look up words. It doesn't mean that you stop conscious learning, but it does mean that you don't have to be doing that all the time, and you shouldn't be doing that all the time. You should be spending a considerable part of your time in Japanese just consuming it, enjoying it, having conversations if you can. And I've talked about conversation partners and tutors, just having conversations and saying, I don't want to learn new Japanese here, I just want to use Japanese. And in fact, you will learn things. You'll learn the kind of way things are put from the way your partner talks to you. You'll learn the kind of things that somebody else understands and the kind of things they seem not to understand very easily from their reaction to what you're saying. So you do actually learn, but learning isn't even the most important part. The important part is beating down the paths so that everything you need to know becomes instinctive and instant. And it takes time for it to reach that stage. There are lots of walks down that path before it becomes completely clear. And this does radically change, in many cases, our idea of what learning or even acquiring language actually is. We often tend to ask, what did I learn from that session? What new things have I learned today in doing this? An important thing to understand is that a very high percentage of what you learn is not even anything you could very easily put into words. You didn't learn new words, but you brought them that much closer to instantaneous retrievability. You didn't learn new structures, but you learned the way people usually put a certain idea and the way a certain kind of speaker, as opposed to another certain kind of speaker, might express the same idea. And a lot of this is knowledge you're never even going to really know you know. It's just there. And this is the basis of really knowing language. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below and I will answer as usual. I'd like to thank my Gold Kokeshi patrons, my producer angels, who make these videos possible, and all my patrons and supporters on Patreon and everywhere. Without you, this radical new approach to Japanese wouldn't be here. Thank you. Thank you so much for your support, your help, your encouragement, and your dedication to Japanese. これからもよろしくお願いします。 Class dismissed.